We're here this morning to support our beloved friend Michael Bishop. Michael wants to express his experiences about Jesus that he's had throughout his life, and our job is to support him doing that.
This is uncomfortable for me in so many ways. You might not know this about me, but I was probably the shyest kid you've ever met. And I still am quite inclined towards hiding. And also, I have strong beliefs that out of respect for community and experiential education, no one should ever talk more than 10 minutes at a time in a group. I'm planning to break that rule. And most of my friends don't seem to have a practice of cuddling with Jesus. And I don't think everyone needs to. And this faith community, Twin Cities Friends Meeting, I'm not sharing stories that are out of the mainstream beliefs of this community. But part of my experience of this faith community is one of the core practices is encouraging people, all of us, to speak openly and vulnerably about our deepest experiences. And to do that in community and have those relationships draw out what's most alive and true for us. So in that sense, I'm happy to be in the mainstream of this community. And I also want to thank, in addition to Twin Cities Friends Meeting that's hosting us physically and spiritually, but thank Minneapolis Friends Meeting. Some friends are here from Minneapolis Meeting, which has also been very important to me. And also want to thank Faith Mennonite Church, that some friends are here from there, and that's also been an important community for me. And those of you who are brave enough to come, even though you're like, Quakers, religion, what, I don't know, not my thing. Part of my understanding of what you all are doing today is an image I think I steal from Bob, of that your role is of midwives, maybe some doulas too. That my sense is there's something alive inside of me that needs to come out. And I need supportive, loving friends to catch that creature coming out, and also to be around in case the delivering parent is in distress. Sense what is needed. Another reason this is uncomfortable for me is that I've tried several times to write about my experiences with Jesus in my life, and I've gotten stuck each time. One reason is that I've kept a journal of those experiences, and it's about 100 typed pages long, and I started by I could just organize that and then pull out some themes and arrange it, and that did not work. I'm not going to read those 100 pages today. And my embarrassment is another reason this is uncomfortable for me. So because of that, I thought I should start with doing something to increase my embarrassment and welcome embarrassment as a teacher. So, in that spirit, I would invite you, as you're able, to stand up and in a minute, when my dear son hits play, I'm going to mosey around and feel free to dance with me. Coming in.
To the hip.
Oh, yeah. Okay. My father was not a preacher man, but his father and his grandfather and some of my uncles, some of my cousins, all preacher men. And whether I like it or not, I am a preacher man. And the stories of Jesus are what go deepest into my bones. And I've gone through lots of spells of running away from that, but I want to be honest about it today. And I want to keep returning to the most grounded experience of that, to what's been my experience physically and emotionally. And I might sometimes read a little of my notes, and I'm sure there'll be silence in between some things. But we're in a Quaker meeting. That's what we do here. Another reason why I'm doing this, and I've asked a few of you to read verses of Scripture in between stories. And the people reading each Scripture verse, there's a reason for, which I won't explain. But the first one is from my dear friend Lisa.
If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you.
And when Jesus said that, I think he was talking especially to me, knowing that I needed encouragement and people pulling out of me what's going on inside of me, because there's usually a lot going on, and usually I need help getting it out. So thank you for doing that today. When I was about 12 years old, I had maybe the most vivid dream of my life. My kids are now about that age. But in the dream, I was on a cross across from Jesus, who was on a cross. And in the dream, I felt both terrified that I was dying and also joy that I was next to Jesus. And later in my life, I read or reread the passage in the gospel that talks about the man across from Jesus on the cross. And that man said, when he was on the cross, he said, "Jesus, remember me when I come into your kingdom." And then Jesus said in response,
"Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise."
So I felt this longing and this uneasiness and intimacy in this dream, but I was just 12. I shook it off. Like, I was weird. A little bit later, as a young teenager, I was with my parents in our living room in our house. And my dad had, not too long before that, become severely depressed. And at this moment in the living room, my dad was pacing around the living room very anxiously, and he was saying, "I just want to die." And I was, as a 12 or 13-year-old boy, was there with him. And I knew that another time recently he had walked out in a busy street, in the middle of the street, not concerned about his safety. And so, as that boy, I held my father to prevent him from going out the door. And he didn't go out the door, but he's been severely depressed for the 30 plus years since then. And at that time, as a teenage boy, and still now, I feel the weight of his situation. And pray, Jesus, remember my father as you come into your kingdom. And then about the same time in my life still, as a young teenager, about the same age Isaiah is, I was with my family at church on Easter Sunday, and in front of the church, like many churches, there was a wooden cross. And as a part of the sermon, the pastor, he said, if you look really closely at the stains in the wooden cross, he said, you can see things. And so I let my eyes get kind of fuzzy, lose their focus, and I stared up at the cross. And I was sure I saw Jesus' hand reaching out there of the cross. I felt a little emotional there in church. And I felt this longing of I felt a longing just that somebody could reach out and understand and hold me as I was feeling heaviness with my father and other things. Now another verse from Nancy.
Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Learn the endless rhythm of grace. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly.
So I had felt this opening there in the church, but I quickly closed that as soon as I could. That I spent most of my time in church the next years writing on the church bulletin a list of the things I thought were wrong about church. Like, people are just saying this stuff every week. It doesn't seem like they really believe it. It's just going through the motions. I had a long list. And I definitely didn't want that kind of emotional experience I had to be manipulated by somebody to get me to believe something. And I definitely didn't want to use that to manipulate someone else to believe something. That was on my list, not to do that. And then I went away to college. I definitely didn't do any of that church stuff when I wasn't forced to. I started going to Buddhist meditation retreats. And then after college, I came here and started working at Friends for a Nonviolent World, Quaker organization. And I started coming to this Friends meeting. And I really liked it. The people didn't seem to really talk about Jesus. And I really liked it that you didn't have to believe a certain thing, and no one seemed to be trying to manipulate me to get me to believe a certain thing. And there were many people in this community that I was especially captivated by. And there were two in particular. One might be sitting 2 people away from me right now, named Bob. And another is my friend Christopher, who's now in New York. And I thought they both seem like deep spiritual guys. And I wanted to be like that. And I was in my young 20s, and I needed some role models. But then I started to have a concern about both of them. Because both of them, independent from each other, I noticed, talked sometimes about Jesus as a living presence in their prayer lives. One day I was driving Christopher to drop him off at his house in North Minneapolis. And I confessed to Christopher my curiosity, my interest in this kind of Jesus thing. And as Christopher was getting out of the car, he poked his head back in the car and he said, my experience is with Jesus, if you invite him, he comes. Closed the door, went up to his house. And as I drove away, I said kind of under my breath and half-heartedly, I invite you, Jesus. But I didn't believe necessarily there was somebody listening to that. But I was curious and nervous. And then a couple weeks after that, Christopher and I were at a retreat together about contemplative leadership. And we had an opening session where we had a little worship time and explained the retreat. And after that opening time ended, I just stayed where I was sitting and closed my eyes and meditated. And everyone else left and went somewhere else. And as I was sitting there with my eyes closed, it felt like somebody, like Jim, was standing behind me and putting their hands on my chest right here. But I looked around and I didn't see anybody. But the feeling of somebody's hands there continued. And it wasn't soothing or comfortable. There was a time when I was a kid that I was on a tennis court and I accidentally put my hand in a kind of electric socket and got shocked. It was kind of like that. It felt like there was this big wire or something hooked up to my chest, just shooting energy throughout my body. And I started kind of shaking with it. And it just felt like raw energy. And as I started thinking of how can I get this to go away, then there were words that went along with that energy. And the words were something to the effect of someone saying to me, I know that there are wonderful older men in your life who are nurturing and can be father figures to you, like Jim, like my friend George Lakey. But what I heard was from this unknown presence was they're not always around. but I am always around. And I can be a father for you. Still feeling this raw, uncomfortable, overwhelming energy. And I started thinking again of, I got to stop this, like it's going to kill me. Or at least, I don't know, something not good. And as I was thinking that, then I felt someone come up next to me on my left side and put their hand on my hand, as Jenny is doing. And again, I looked over there but didn't see anybody. But I thought at first, oh, it's Christopher or somebody saw that I was having this panic attack or something and was coming to comfort me. But I didn't see anybody there, but this presence touching my left hand felt very different than this electrical outlet thing going on up here. It felt very personal. And the best way I could describe it is as irresistible compassion. Which is like Jenny, too. And I felt from this presence, this strong knowing that he, and I thought of it as he, could see everything about me. Like there was no point, I knew, in hiding anything. It's like, well, no, doesn't matter. I can't hide. And I also knew there's no point in trying to like posture or present myself in a certain way. Like, no, he sees and accepts all of me in a way that I never had felt before. And then there were words that came with this energy, which were this other energy, it's not going to kill you. In fact, he was saying, I am here to help you take it in. That's my job. I am here to be a bridge between you and this raw energy. And I started crying with how embraced I felt in a way I never had so fully before. And just sat for a while with that sensation. And then eventually I heard somebody over there setting the table, putting down plates and silverware for dinner. And I slowly started to pay attention again to what else was happening. And ever since that day, which was about 20 years ago, most days I haven't felt that kind of tangible, dramatic presence. But if I'm honest, I've always felt since then a sense of companionship with that presence. And as it was happening, at some point I thought, oh, this must be Jesus, even though I hadn't had that experience before. And as soon as I thought that energy of compassion and embrace, it just went more deeply into my body. Like a confirmation of like, oh yeah, that's me. At about the same time in my life, I was working at the office of Friends for a Nonviolent World, and I got a phone call I answered the phone, the office, with this woman asking about the workshop, Alternatives to Violence workshop we were organizing. She asked about where it was and what was happening there. Answered the questions. Hung up the phone. I hadn't met the person calling before. But when I hung up the phone, I knew just so clearly, oh, I want to marry that person. And it was not too different a time than that time at the retreat, where it was a similar knowing in a way of like, oh, that's Jesus. I knew, oh, I want to marry that person. Before that time, I hadn't had a lot of those kind of, oh, I know that kind of thing experiences. So then I went to the workshop. I met this woman who turned out to look just like Jenny. And when I met her in person, totally confirmed, I definitely want to marry this person. She was not having the same experience at the time. But about a year and a half later, we sat in the corner right in this room over there, Jenny and I, and we had what we called, or at least I called, a meeting for worship with attention to engagement. So things continued with me and Jesus. I'll skip over the details and give you one snapshot of those years that I was working in another nonprofit, and I was the interim executive director, and I was feeling quite drained and depleted by that and beyond my capacity. And I asked some friends to come sit in silence with me in my office to be spiritual support during that time. And as one friend, Tom, was there, I felt like I had tried to get rid of that feeling of the dream from when I was 12 of being on the cross, but I felt kind of crucified again. But I felt self-pity with it too. I felt sorry for myself, like, oh no, all these things are happening to me. And then I had this strong image of Jesus kind of getting in my face, not in a very comforting, compassionate way like before, or at least not that I felt. And what I heard was him saying, pick up your mat, let go of your limitations. And then it was like he had this big sword coming towards me, ready to cut away what limitations I was carrying that were getting in the way of my work, especially my self-righteousness and judgment. And I felt convicted with compassion. And at some point in there, I started more intentionally cultivating a relationship with this presence I called Jesus that seemed to show up. And at some point, Bob and we started meeting to pray with Jesus, and have done that every month for 10 years without missing a month. And then a year and a half ago, I found out that I had brain cancer, the most aggressive kind of brain cancer. And last summer, after a brain surgery, I got meningitis, infection in my spinal fluid, which can quickly be fatal. And I was in and out of the hospital with that. And then one evening, I was out of the hospital, but I was obsessively checking my temperature. Because if my fever was over 100 or so, I was supposed to go back to the hospital quickly. I made complicated charts, my temperature, but I was not very restful. I was quite anxious about the meningitis on top of the cancer. And one of my main comforts in this time with cancer has been my primary care doctor, who's also a neighbor and a friend, Peter. But Peter was on a vacation with his family this week when I was obsessively checking my temperature. And I couldn't call Peter, couldn't go see him. So I felt more anxious with that. And I was in bed, my mind racing with these questions. When I felt another hand, this time on my scar where my surgeries have been, which is right here. And it was that what was now a familiar energy of compassion that is also challenging and melts me. And this time it came with the words of, I know that Peter is out of town, so Jesus seemed to be offering, I can be your primary physician right now. I can let you know when you need to go to the hospital. But he said, right now, what's happening is that you're being pulled closer to the healing fire. And you're not going to die from this. This is burning away what's getting in the way of you in love. Which helped soften me and help me eventually go to sleep. And that was about a year ago, and my infectious disease doctor at the time had said, the meningitis definitely won't go away unless I have another surgery to take out the titanium that's in my head from the previous surgeries, and also the bone that it's enmeshed with, which my oncologist and my surgeon didn't want to do. So they just fought with each other, and I was in the middle. Now, some of my doctors speculate that the meningitis that I had was actually useful, or could have been useful, in activating my immune system to also fight the cancer in addition to the infection. And I can't tell when I'm being pulled closer to a healing fire and when I'm just physically ill, which is one reason I'm grateful for Jesus and his physician companions. My most frequent experience in the recent months of Jesus is of him physically massaging my heart to soften it. As Pope Francis, colleague of Jim's, has said, that we need a revolution of tenderness. And that fits with my experience of Jesus. At the end of last summer, my white blood cell count was quite low, meaning I was susceptible to germs and quickly catching things. And there was one night at dinner with my family when I said, I'm feeling kind of lonely and self-conscious about always nagging you to be washing your hands and not double dipping in the hummus. And Isaiah's response, both at the dinner table and later, was very understanding and empathetic in a way that really moved me. And later that evening, I was sitting in our bedroom thinking about that and crying about how much I love Isaiah. And as I was doing that, Isaiah walked past our bedroom door and said, "Hey, Dad, what you doing?" I said, "Crying about how much I love you." And when I was a teenage boy, anything like that, I would have run as fast as I could away from that. But Isaiah did not run away. Instead, when I said that, he came right up next to me. He grabbed my hands. And he looked into my eyes. Which, of course, made me cry a lot more. As I cried more, I tried to let go of my hands, let go of Isaiah's hands so he could have a break and they wouldn't torture him. Isaiah then squeezed my hands tighter. And about then, Grace walks by the door. And I said, "Hey, Grace, do you mind coming in here so I can hold your hands and cry about how much I love you?" She also cooperated. And Jenny was with us, and I held Jenny's hands and cried about how much I loved Jenny. And as all that was happening, that pesky guy, Jesus, seemed to show up and say, "This is what I've been trying to do. I've been trying to soften your heart so you can let love in, let it move." Several years ago, we were having dinner with some nuns in North Minneapolis that we love. And after dinner, I was talking to one of the nuns. I forget if it was Mary Frances or Karen. And I said something about I've been holding hands with Jesus. And I thought, she's a nun. She'll be down with that. And of course she was supportive. And then she said something like, "Yeah, when I was first becoming a nun, and when I was young in my faith, I would have these traumatic visions, touch of Jesus." She said, "It's because I needed that, because I was so shaky in my faith. I needed that real immediate experience." She said, "But now it's more like a comfortable, quiet companion. It's not as dramatic." And I felt a little embarrassed, that means I need it, yeah. And it's true that I think the dramatic experiences and images and vision are not the point, and that most people don't need that in order to be able to really receive and let love move, but I do still. And I don't know how much of these experiences is my imagination and how much is stories of my family and culture that are in my bones. But I know that relationship with Jesus has been the most consistent thing that's opened my heart in the last 20 years. And one guide I have for relating that is a verse that I asked my friend Thor to read. So my understanding is that irresistible compassion that reached out to me isn't meant as something just to be for my benefit, but as an invitation for all of us to live it out boldly in our own lives and to do even greater things. And to close this part, before we transition into responses, questions, I want to ask you, those of you who are willing to come as I kneel and lay your hands on me, as I say a brief prayer. Jesus, my body is broken and cannot be fixed by medicine, and is dependent upon grace. And Jesus, our country is broken and cannot be fixed only by our effort. And we are dependent upon grace. And I invite you, as healer, as teacher, as guide. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. And one verse that summarizes for me my understanding of what Jesus has been up to with me, I asked Grace to read.
What I'm trying to do here is get you to relax, not be so preoccupied, getting so you can respond to God's giving.
And with that, I'll turn it over to Susan and Mary Beth and all of you.
Jesus loves me, this I know, 'cause my Michael tells me so. Jesus loves me, this I know, my Michael tells me so. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Our Michael tells us so.